Welcome to morning prayer. My name is Sarah Messerschmidt. For today's service, we are using these worship folders. There are some in the back if you didn't get one that you can pick up. Today, our next speaker in the series, Things I Hope For, will be Dr. David Henreckson, who serves as the director for the Institute of Leadership and Service. Both today's service and Friday morning prayer are Core Lab approved. Now, let us worship. God is our refuge. We need not fear.
A reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and he told them to give her something to eat. The word of the Lord. Good morning. I'm very glad to be here, and thankful also to the chapel team for inviting me to speak this morning and for the technical help they're going to provide. Thank you. This series of morning chapel talks is on the theme, Things I Hope For. And I will share some specific objects of hope later on. But first, I want us to situate ourselves in the text we just read from Mark, which is, I think, one of the most poignant stories in Mark's gospel. In the chapters that precede the story in the gospel, we find that Jesus has begun to enjoy the peak of his popularity. Crowds follow him about, wondering at the ease with which he heals the sick, casts out demons, and challenges the political and spiritual leadership. He does strange and unexpected things. He is the first century equivalent of a social media meme generator. Thousands follow him around from place to place, wondering what he'll do next. And in the previous chapter, the Pharisees have already begun asking how they might go about canceling him. In the episode right before our passage, Mark tells us an incredible story about a wild man with superhuman strength, possessed by a legion of demons too strong and dangerous to be bound by chains, who had been quarantined among the tombstones at the edge of town. When Jesus exorcises the legion of demons out of the wild man, they ask him to cast them into a nearby herd of pigs, 2,000 in number. When Jesus gives them permission, the devils rush into the pigs, run them over a cliff edge, only to drown them in the lake below. Imagine the scene as onlookers witness this shocking series of events. A teeming swarm of shrieking, demonically possessed pigs drowning themselves in a local lake, and a wild man formerly feared and ostracized from his community, now seemingly restored to sanity. Don't let the utter strangeness of what you just heard go unnoticed. In our familiarity with various Bible stories, we may be tempted to domesticate some of these strange events. But the story of Jesus, especially in the action-oriented Gospel of Mark, involves many shocking incidents, most of them caused by Jesus himself. Wherever the Son of Man goes, demons will gather to call him out. The sick and the lame will clamor for his attention. The diseased and unclean will reach to touch his garment, and the anxious parents will seek him out when all hope seems lost. This is the effect that Jesus has wherever he goes. He is a strange wonder worker, a social disruption, a political hazard, one who speaks with authority that makes even devils shake with fear. Jairus, who is introduced at the beginning of our passage, knows all of this. Jesus' reputation has already been established. What is notable about this man, Jairus, however, is that he is a pillar of the community, a leader in the local synagogue. He, more than anyone else, has much to lose by associating with Jesus, who has notoriously attracted a large crowd, many of whom, as we noted, are the sick, diseased, and the social outcasts of the region. And yet Jairus' 12-year-old daughter is dying. The doctors can do nothing more. Funeral preparations have already begun. We're not told whether the illness was sudden or drawn out, but it's at least clear that Jairus has reached out to Jesus as his last resort. He pleads earnestly. Jesus needs to come right away and lay hands on her. But he doesn't. In the middle part of the passage from Mark, which we skipped over in the reading, we see Jesus distracted for a time by an unwell woman who he takes time to address and heal. Hers is another story for another time. But imagine yourself in Jairus' shoes, how anxiously impatient he must be. There is no time. What is Jesus doing, lingering here? Well, Jesus attends to the sick woman. Jairus' daughter, we learn, dies. Jesus wasn't quick enough. He got distracted. Everyone comes to tell Jairus, it's too late. She's gone. Why bother the teacher? Death has claimed her. It was a long time coming. It's now time to mourn and handle things properly in good order. And then, of course, Jesus says something ridiculous. Walking to Jairus' house, finally, witnessing the expected sadness over the death of the family's precious little girl, he says, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." Everyone laughs. How could he be so callous? Jesus tarried with the unclean woman, and Jairus' daughter breathes her last. And yet, in the Gospel of Mark, we've begun to know this strange man named Jesus better. He is unpredictable, frustrating, intentionally confusing in his speech, and he certainly doesn't operate by Midwestern standards of punctuality. But he is always present when you least expect him to be. Even when you press your mouth to the dust and turn your cheek to the one who strikes you with insults too painful to bear, Jesus will not look away. He will tarry with you. He can sense when an act of faith pulls on his garment, demands his attention, requires you to stop. He calls you his daughter or son. He's patient like that in ways you can barely imagine. When Jesus arrives at the girl's deathbed, he sends everyone out, the text says, except for the girl's parents and his 3 closest friends. So there they are, 6 individuals standing around the pale, breathless body of this beloved 12-year-old daughter. Jesus seems to have an intention behind his actions, but what must the others be thinking? No one, after all, has witnessed a resurrection before. I was talking with my younger sister about this sermon when I first wrote it. I'd forgotten something that she permitted me to share with you today. A couple years ago, my sister went through a complicated pregnancy that put her on bed rest for several months. Her baby girl survived past the point of viability in utero, but died at 35 weeks before my sister could give birth. When the baby was stillborn, they named her Marian Joy and buried her in a tiny grave in Connecticut. On her gravestone, under her name, they included a single line from this very gospel story. "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but asleep." I don't know how much comfort this line brings my sister today, even a few years later. She says that sorrow comes and goes, sometimes in overwhelming waves. Jairus' daughter barely tasted death before her restoration, but Jesus' words have yet to yield their promise for little Marian, at least as far as my sister is concerned. It may be true that those we lose are not dead, but only sleep, and yet the pain of separation is still felt as acutely. The anxiety that Jairus felt at the beginning was quelled by the end of our gospel story. But in many of our earthly stories, the anxiety never goes away. The memory of loss leans into eternity, with only a speculative imagination of what the promised restoration might look like. In her novel Housekeeping, Marilynne Robinson writes that the memory is the sense of loss, and loss pulls us after it. God himself was pulled after us into the vortex we made when we fell, or so the story goes. And while he was on earth, he mended families. He gave Lazarus back to his mother, and to the centurion he gave his daughter again. He even restored the severed ear of the soldier who came to arrest him. A fact, she writes, that allows us to hope the resurrection will reflect a considerable attention to detail. As long as Jesus lives, there is reason to hope that the unclean will be made whole and those we've lost will be returned. Those who live among the tombstones will be restored. Those who have been ostracized from their communities can find a new family in the house of God. Those who have become shells of their former selves through years of depression or anxiety can be made whole. Those whom we have watched wither away under the ravaging effects of a lethal virus will breathe again in strength. Those who sleep will rise up, wider awake in the blazing light of day than they ever were before. This is the essence of hope, the thing that makes us fools by earthly recognition but gives superhuman faith when things are most dark. When Jesus says, "Little girl, arise," he speaks as one with authority. His wonder-working is no parlor trick, no smoke and mirrors. His power, motivated by the depths of his love, is the real thing. Jesus takes her lifeless hand and says, "Little girl, arise," and of course she does. Then notice the last little detail in the scripture reading. He tells her family to give her something to eat, something so mundane, so ordinary, so intrinsic to the basic needs of human life, and Jesus reminds them to feed this little girl. She's been resurrected to life, and Jesus makes sure she is well taken care of because he fills the hungry with good things. So the Lord does pay considerable attention to detail. He attends to our most basic human needs and desires and hungers. He delights to wake us up, to make us see the light of day in all its brilliance. Sometimes he tarries. Sometimes his promised deliverance bears the weight and length of eternity. So, you ask me what I hope for. Right now, in this moment, I hope to embrace a friend I've missed. I hope to see my neighbor's face in the grocery store, smiling, stressed, or growling at her misbehaving 3-year-old. It doesn't matter. I hope to travel to an unknown foreign place and discover a tiny shop selling old books I didn't know I needed. I hope to walk down the streets of a Chicago neighborhood and not see the storefront windows broken and blighted by the seemingly fruitless struggles over systemic racial wrongs. I hope for things that were, now aren't, and may yet be. We all have, I think, a memory of happier times, often viewed through a glass darkly. But that memory, even when broken into 1,000 shards, still refracts some present joy and future hope. Jairus was given his daughter back, and Jesus didn't make him wait for some future resurrection. Others do have to wait, and that waiting for Jesus to show up and make things right can feel interminable. My sister, after Marion's death, had another baby, again a daughter. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it feels like I received dozens of little video clips on Marco Polo every day, mostly of this relatively new human being living out her boring 1-year-old life. Repeating consonants that vaguely resemble words, gleefully stuffing Cheerios up her nose, accidentally whacking herself in the face with a toy, then becoming resentful at the universe for the injury. New loved ones, new blessings, new joys every morning do not erase the losses that you have suffered. But they do remind you of one who lingers, sometimes on a timeline too slow for us. They remind us of one who wakes us up and calls for breakfast. They remind us of the 1,000 little shards of hope that refract what was lost, and together promise a future so resplendent that every earthly glory retreats into shadow. And thanks be to God.